All right, so let's take a look at this assignment from yesterday. Pull this over here. Okay, so yesterday we were using jQuery to, select nodes from the DOM, change HTML attributes. We even might have messed with some CSS. And this was one of our assignments, which was this pizza traversal, where we were showing and hiding this address, or showing this address, I guess, that we were getting from the data set, or from the data address attribute. So let's take a look at the code that we have for this. So I already pulled this down. Cool. So we were given, I believe, just this HTML file, right?
Yeah.
All right. So let's walk through this HTML file a little bit. The lessons that we went over yesterday are going to play directly into today. So that's why I want to go over, or just kind of use this as a review, because it's going to go right into what we're going to talk about for most of the day today. Okay, so we have this HTML document. This is maybe one of the bigger ones that we've seen so far. Let's just walk through it real quick. What is this we have up at the top?
Document type.
Doc type, and that just tells us that we have this HTML file, right? That what we've delivered, or what we are going to deliver, is an HTML file. Then we have our HTML tag, and then we have the head. What type of stuff lives up in the head? What is the head of the HTML document?
Title, links, scripts.
Scripts, yeah. It's all this information that lets our document run, that helps our document run, tells it all sorts of information it needs to do what it needs to do. So yeah, we have our links to our style sheets up here. Looks like we have an external Bootstrap style sheet, and then we also have the Restaurant Finder CS, which is right here, which just has this one thing, which is hiding the list. See, we have our title here, which isn't filled out. And then we also are loading our JavaScript files, right? So we're loading jQuery here up at the top. That's happening first. And then we're loading restaurant.js, which is our local file. So this line 4 is making an HTTP request to the jQuery site and pulling the jQuery from there. So it's important to understand the difference here. What's happening on line 4 is a request is being made for this library, and it's being pulled in. On line 5, we're grabbing what is our local Restaurant Finder file, which I made right here, which has nothing in it right now. And let me split the screen here. I always do that wrong. There we go. Okay, so this is our empty JS file that's being loaded right now. Cool. So we're going down our head. Then we have our body. The body is all of our content, everything that's actually going to show up on our page. You can open this page right here. And here is everything in the body is what we're seeing right here. Let's split this up. Oh, why is this always being such a pain in my ass? Here we go. That goes there, and that goes there. Let's see if we can keep track of these things. Okay. Cool. So when we are using JavaScript to manipulate the DOM, it's important that we have some understanding of the structure of the HTML document. So we're just going to walk through it a little bit, and the more we understand the structure, the easier it's going to be for us to start doing these like knowing what we need to append, knowing what we need to grab, knowing what we might need to put an event listener on, right? And so this is where designing your HTML file is important, that the structure of it makes sense. And so we can even see, and we can just infer from looking at this right now, is that we have these like 3 equal kind of sections, right? These rows or columns. This is probably separated into columns, I believe, with Bootstrap. Yeah, that's probably what's going on right here. So we have these sections. So we have some repeated HTML, right? So we have, looks like some sort of header, some sort of paragraph, a button that right now does nothing, and a link that right now just, if you notice, just throws a little hashtag up there. I think. Wait, did it? Well, it did before. I don't know why it's not doing it now. There it is. All right, whatever. This link that's basically not doing anything either. So let's go back and look at how this HTML is. We have our container. This is pretty common to have like one huge div that holds everything and label a container, especially if you're using something like Bootstrap. We'll want something like that. We'll see this idea of a container kind of holding our app play out in a bunch of different ways as we learn some different frameworks and stuff. Another div that's setting our rows. This is all Bootstrap stuff going down here. Here's where we start to get into our actual content. So we have this class, restaurant detail. It has this new tag that we probably hadn't seen before, data-address. This data tag you can use on any element, I think, or at least any div for sure, any element. And it's not always going to be, you see, we have this one called data address. Data address isn't a tag. Data dash is a tag. So we do data dash address. That allows us to grab this data attribute and then get information that is kind of labeled as address. So we're kind of setting the key as address. And then the value is whatever we put in quotes here. Does that make sense? So data is the attribute. Then we can do dash whatever we want to call our key. And then we can add our information that we want to do here. And this just allows us to hold data in the tag itself. Then we have our H3. We saw this before, our header, our paragraph. These are all inside of our divs. So so we have these containers, right? And then they have things inside of them. What if this H3, what is the relationship between this H3 and this div? Child, right? Yeah, the H3 is the div's child. The div is the H3's parent, right? And so this nesting, this idea of nesting these things, this child-parent relationship is important. One, jQuery just uses that language, but two, it helps us understand the structure of our HTML document. What about the P tag in the H3? What will we call those? What's their relationship? Siblings, yeah, they're siblings because they're both inside the same container and they're kind of at the same level, right? They're just sandwiched next to each other. Cool? All right, so let's do at least the first part, and maybe we'll do the emoji part because that looked kind of fun too. Every time I hook up this projector, it messes with all my sizing for this stuff. Which I know is not interesting to you guys. Okay, cool. All right. So what's my first task here? What do I want to do? When I press this button, I want to show the address down here, right? I want the address to appear. So where am I going to get the address first? How the hell do I know what the address is? In the data attribute, it's up here for me, right? So this is going to be a common thing that we're going to be doing with JavaScript and with jQuery. And today, it'll kind of, when we do Ajax, it'll be pretty similar. We're going to, you'll see this pattern emerge, right? I want to grab data. I got to get it from somewhere. And then I want to display it somehow. That's going to happen constantly in a bunch of different ways as we continue to do web development and push forward with the frameworks we're using. And today when we do Ajax, and then even right now, I want data, so I got to figure out where it is. Then I got to grab it, and then I got to display it somehow, show it to my user, or I might manipulate it first and then show it to my user. We'll get into that. I might have to parse it out or change it or something like that, right? And then display it to my user. You're going to see this pattern over and over again. So we found our data. This time we don't have to reach out to an outside resource. That's what we're going to do later today. Our data is actually in our HTML document. We just can't see it yet. So we know where that is. So now we have to figure out how are we going to grab it? How are we going to grab it? Let's start the way we start all our, how do we start all our jQuery documents?
Ready.
Yeah, document ready. What is the purpose of the document ready?
So as soon as the page is loaded, you can do stuff.
So as soon as the page is loaded, you can do stuff with it. I think that's perfect. Function. I believe that that is correct. Cool, yeah, so just a reminder, these HTML page loads from top to bottom. And when it's loading, it gets to this line 5 right here. And it says, oh, okay, I see that there is a JavaScript file. I'm going to load that file. If we had anything in here that wanted to manipulate any of the DOM right here, it would break because none of this stuff is loaded yet. So if you're not using jQuery, which you very well might not in the future, you would want to load your script tag at the bottom so that the whole DOM loads and then your script tag runs. But because we are using jQuery, because we are using jQuery, we have this document ready method or function. And it says when, so the HTML file will get to line 5. It'll jump over, it'll see document ready, and it'll say, okay, I know to wait until the entire document is ready, and then I can run the code inside this function. Cool? So we're going to set that up. We know where we want to get our information. And then how do we want, what is the other behavior that we want? What do we want to happen here? I actually feel like we want to display the address when. What interaction are we looking at? When the button's pressed. Yeah, I think I might have gone a little backwards here. I mean, not backwards, but anyway. Okay, so we want this information to display when the button is pressed. So whenever we're doing something with interaction where we're kind of going to anticipate what the user is doing, that's when we want to do an event listener. That's an event, right? When the user clicks something, that triggers an event. There's constantly events being triggered all over your browser. Right now, when I'm moving my mouse, there's a mouse over event being triggered, right? We're not grabbing it, so we're not seeing that data, but it's happening. Every time I press this button, we're not grabbing it, but a button press event is being triggered. This is a click event on here. Even when I'm clicking on this div right here, there's a click event happening, and we can have access to that. And that event will give us the ability to do a bunch of different things, right? So we want event on this button, right? Actually, we want event on all of these buttons. So I kind of know how to do that, but I am not 100% sure. So that's for later. Let's look this up. Event listener button. Let's do jQuery. Oh, cool. There's click right there. Click, I can just do click. Isn't there also an on? Usually I will just scroll down and so my strategy usually is to get to code as quickly as possible. If I have a good idea of what I want to do, I just want to see code as quickly as possible. And then if I cannot kind of decide from the code what it's doing, then I will go back up and start reading the docs a little bit. But this looks pretty good to me. So it looks like we've seen this before, right? This is jQuery grabbing an element. It looks like by an ID and then by 2 tags. And then it looks like this is the event that they're listening for, and then they're passing a function. So I'm just actually going to steal this whole thing. And we will edit it for our own purposes. Put it over here. What do we want to grab? The button. Which one?
The show address button.
Yeah, but we got 3 of them. Should we grab all of them?
No, the current.
Yeah, this is where our dilemma is, right? Like we just want, like when I press this show address button, I just want to show the address for Domino's. Here I just want to show the address for Giordano's. Can
you use this?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So Michael said, can you use this? What do you mean by that, Michael?
It would just reference whatever, I guess the easiest way that I can explain it would be it would just reference whatever container you're in at that time. That's
a great way to describe it. It references whatever container you're in at that time. We can do that. So what we can do is we can, we'll put an event listener. Now, when we do this, if we remember from yesterday, if I grab something just by its, right now we're grabbing it not by an ID, not by a class, we're grabbing it by the actual HTML element. And when I do this, it's going to give me all of those elements, right? So actually, if we, let's just see that real quick one more time in the browser. If we do the same thing in the browser, you see we get this array-like list with all the buttons, right? So now we have all the buttons. We've grabbed all of them. Damn it. So this is going to give me all the buttons. And so this is another thing that we want to be aware of. We can put an event listener on an array, on this big list of things, right? So now we have an event listener on every button on the page. Ed, did you have a question?
Yeah, I don't know how are we able to get all the buttons? I don't see a class ID, a class attribute with button.
That's a great question. That's a great question. So Ed asked, this is for the video and for everybody else, Ed asked, how are we able to get this button when we don't have a class or an, I don't think there are any IDs on this page, are there? We don't have a class or an ID attribute anywhere. So there are 3 ways, actually, that we can grab stuff out of the DOM. We can grab it by its class, and the way we would do that is, so where's a class right here? Class list group right here. If I wanted class list group, and this is true in JavaScript, and it's true in CSS, too. We do this the same way. Anytime I want something with a class, I put dot, and then whatever the class name is. So what was that, like list dash group? Let's look at this in the browser, actually. A little bit easier. Go away. Cool. So here, grabbing something by class would be, oh man. Jesus. Ah! List dash group. This will probably give me an array because there's a bunch of things with class list group, correct? Yeah, so there's a ton of stuff, or a ton, there's 3. So this will give me it. So that's grabbing something by class. What if I want to grab something by ID? What is that? The hashtag, right? Then I can also grab something just by its HTML tag, like just by, so I could grab every H1 on the page. Oh, God. This is not my keyboard. I think there's only 1, so it might just give me 1. But if there were more, it would give me more. So to answer your question, that's a good question. It's an important clarification because, again, with the CSS as well, all of these rules ring true, right? So you can target stuff those 3 ways, class, ID, and by the HTML tag. So button is an HTML tag right here. Cool. So that's how we're grabbing all these buttons. Good question. Any other questions before we move on? All right, cool. So now I have this event listener on these buttons. I always like to check, and I think I talked about this yesterday, I like to check everything step by step by step. So once I put an event listener on, I want to make sure it's working. And I usually just do that by console logging. Something positive, like it is working. Where did it go? There we go. Test this. Cool. And now I can see right down here, and it's working on every button. So now every time I press a button, I can run a function. Now I know that once I press this button, anything I put in here will run. So what do I want to do? Let's go back to our original problem. I need to display this address, correct? So what are the steps I need to take? First, I need to get the address. Then I need to somehow display it, right? First, I need to get it. Then I need to somehow display it. So how am I going to get it out of the div? Remember, it's up here. How do I get it? Oh my God.
Something like this.
You got it. You're getting there. What?
This dot, I think, like, you go back up to the parent.
Yeah.
And then.
So James is saying this, and then we go back up to the parent. So this dot parent. And just to remind us, what is this? Yeah, the current button we're clicking. And then James is saying we're going to try dot parent, right? And parent, which we talked about right in the beginning, is going to go and give me the parent element. And since this button is sitting inside of the div where we want to get the address from, I think that that's a good idea. I think that's a good way to try it. So let's try that. This dot parent. Again, this is all jQuery that we're using right here. Dot parent, I believe, is a jQuery function. This dot parent, and let's just make sure that gives us the right thing. It might seem really tedious to keep console logging, console logging, console logging. I think it's really important because I think when you start writing, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of code, and you're like anticipating, okay, this does this, this does this, this does this, this does this, and you make one tiny little mistake, as you have seen me make a dozen times, even just in this small presentation, those build up, right? Then you're 10 lines in, you have 3 little small things, and then you're going back and checking everything, right? So I think, I know this is tedious, but I think this is definitely best practice, especially when you're learning, right?
I think you use a debugger, it's going to be easier.
You can also use the debugger as well. Yeah.
And when you console, or not when you console, but whenever you're on the console and the.
When you're in here.
Then you can actually go through and do what you're doing. But
absolutely. If you put debugger in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do it that way as well. I don't know why I always console log. I mean, if I have a bigger application, I will always I will use debugger. But when I'm doing these small things, I find console logging, I don't know, just do that. But yeah, you're totally right. You can use the debugger. Okay, what was I doing? Okay. Cool, this is working. That's giving me that one. That's giving me that one. And that's giving me that one. Sweet. Cool, we're almost there. So we have the element we want. We just need to get the address. I'm going to speed this up a little bit so we can get to the next thing. Which I believe, I actually don't remember how to do that. Let's see.
Data.
It's just data, and then you pass it, right? I actually do remember.
It's
yeah.
on the GitHub page.
Oops. It's dot data, and then whatever attribute, right? Is it, what do we call it? Address?
Address.
Cool. So this should give me this. I'm going to save this to a variable. Just because. So that'll give me my address. So now I have it. What do I want to do now?
Append it.
Append it to what?
Whatever's after the button. Or next after, I think is what I did, because you got another element in the HTML after the button, which is the show address button. So you want to do next function and then dot after and then dot append address.
Okay. Couldn't we just append it to the parent element?
I mean, yeah, you can put it up there if you want.
Just dot after.
Well, actually, here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to actually refactor this a little bit. I think what I'm going to do.
You could just put it.
I'm going to do the div, or let's do parent div. And I'm just going to have that be this. And then I'm going to grab the data from that div, right? And then I think I can just do parent div dot append. And then what do we want to put here? The address, right? Let's put it in its own div, I guess. And then I'm using the interpolation. Do we remember this from kind of a while ago? I think I just close div like that. Cool. So just to walk through this one more time, we're putting an event listener on all the buttons. When the button is clicked, it's going to run this anonymous function. We're going to create this variable where we're going to grab the parent of the button that was clicked. That makes sure that we get the specific div that we want. Then, go ahead.
We need to fix line 5, don't we?
What's wrong with line 5?
Let address equal, it needs to be parent div, not div, correct? Oh, no.
Yes, no, you are correct. Thank you. You are absolutely correct. Good eye. Cool. So we are setting it to parent div, the parent div. Then we are grabbing the address. We're using this data function to grab. This data function will grab anything with data that's labeled data dash, and then we pass it, like, again, the key, which is address. This will return the value, which is the actual address. Then we're going to grab the parent div again and append, which is just adding to the bottom, our own div that we made with address in it. Cool? Hopefully this works. Oh, cool. There we go. Now there is one problem with this. What is it? Does anybody know?
It'll probably keep.
Yeah, it'll keep going.
Yeah. So we're not done. We are done because we're not going to keep going because I want to get to Ajax. But what I just wanted to kind of brainstorm with everybody. What are some possible solutions to this? What if I wanted it so that when I press the button, it showed the address, and when I pressed it again, it disappeared? Or at the very least, I don't want it to keep showing up like a dozen times.
You can just remove the listener.
Remove the what?
You can just remove the listener, I suppose. On button click.
What do you mean remove the listener?
Like once it runs, once you run and once it appends it, you can just write more code that says, okay, now don't listen anymore.
Write some code that says stop listening?
Yes.
How would it know though? How would I tell the program, like how would it know when to stop listening? What condition would I want it to look for?
That if there is
any ideas? Remote, any ideas? Well, we know we can check. We can check the DOM to see if something exists, right? We can grab an element from the DOM. And so a couple of different ways you could do this. One, you could add a class here so that every time you're adding it, it has its own class. And then it would just be a conditional, right? If this button has a child with this class on it or with this ID, then just don't update the DOM. Otherwise, update the DOM. Something like that, right? Does that make sense? So I just want you to be aware of that. We're going to get more into these ideas, this idea of like, again, it's just a conditional. It's just an if statement, things we've done before, right? But it's just a different type of thinking because now we're shifting from, we were doing algorithms and then we were doing a lot of database backend stuff. And now we're doing front end. And I think sometimes people forget that like a lot of these same ideas transfer right over, right? If this condition is met, if this thing exists, do this. If it doesn't exist, create it, right? That type of stuff. Cool? All right, any questions before we move on to Ajax? All right, let me stop this recording. Start a new one.